Today we're going to do a project. We are in Classical Conversations, Cycle 1, Week 15, and we're studying a man named Fra Angelico. Fra Angelico was an Italian painter of the early Renaissance period. He was born in 1395 in Viccio, Italy, and he died on February 18, 1455. He was around 60 years old when he passed. His real name, his baptized name, was Guido di Pietro, and he was known as being one of the greatest first-century painters. He had a strong classical influence. He was a peaceful, religious man, and he also was an artist. He made a series of religious paintings. He made over 50 of them depicting the passion and the life of Christ. He made altarpieces, and also he used some Gothic styles. He made beautiful frescoes for churches and convents and priories and abbeys. He lived at San Marco's Priory. One of his famous paintings is the Annunciation, which is when the angel Gabriel came to Mary and announced that she would become the mother of Jesus Christ. I found a picture and I tried to print it. It's not real colorful, but I hope you can see it. This was done by Fra Angelico, and it's just beautiful. Mary's sitting there patiently, and the angel tells her not to be afraid, that she was chosen. I hope you can see it. I hope I'm holding it up properly. So I wanted to tell you a few historical facts about Fra Angelico, and then we have a great project which was really fun, and I'm going to show you how to make the project for children as opposed to actually making a fresco on a wall, which would take days. So Fra Angelico was very religious. He belonged to an order of Dominicans. He was a friar, and there were different orders of these people. There were Augustinians, there were Carmelites, and Franciscans. I'm sure you've seen how the Franciscans used to make wine, probably still do. And he lived in a priory in San Domenico at let's see if I can pronounce it. Fisole. He lived in San Domenico, Fisole. He was called Fra Giovanni de Fiesole in the beginning when he joined the priory. But after he died, his friar brothers named him Fra Angelico, which means angelic man brother. He was very peaceful and kind and good, and they just loved him. Everyone who met him apparently loved him. Not only was he good to the poor and good to his fellow brother friars, he was good in his community, and he was touched by God with his artistry, with his fresco painting, which is what I like the best about him. So I just thought this was a good side information. Frater in Latin means brother, and then the word started to be used as fra instead of frater. And if you ever belong to a sorority or a fraternity in college, the word fraternity means like a brotherhood, a unity of brothers that are in the same fraternity. So fraternity, fra, the Latin root, is brother. So I thought that was a really great fact. So a priory, I just thought I'd add this information. It was kind of interesting to me. My roots were from a Catholic upbringing in my earlier part of my life, and I really didn't quite understand the difference between like a rectory, a priory, an abbey, a monastery, all that stuff. I should know, shame on me, but I outlined it so you could understand it. So a priory is like a religious fraternity led by religious leaders of a lower rank. An abbey is a religious fraternity of maybe a higher rank, like a privileged hierarchies of the church. And a monastery is a specific religious home for, let's say, for example, for monks. And many monks are cloistered where they are self-sufficient. You know, they have farms and they make their own everything, and they pretty much live in silence so they can pray for the world. And that's the difference. Now, there was a pope named Pope Eugene IV, and he called Fra Angelico to Rome, where he was commissioned to paint for convents and churches and abbeys. That's how good he was. He had established a great reputation. So I want to teach you what a fresco is, because that was the way he painted at that time. He loved to paint walls for religious buildings and places that were important where people met to seek God. Now, Michelangelo was very famous for fresco painting, but right now we're just going to talk about Fra Angelico. So he used plaster, which had some lime and water. And I'm going to give you the YouTube site, but I found a fascinating site where a man actually takes you through the steps of making a fresco. But I'll just vaguely tell you how they do it. They use a thing called pozzolano, which is when they add a little violet pigment to the paste. The lime it's very hot when it's mixed, when it's crunched up and mixed and fired with water. And there's a chemical process that makes the lime and the water and the volcanic ash. They used some volcanic ash, I guess they grinded it up. And when they mixed these two, it made like a chemical, like an explosion, where when it dried, it was kind of porous in the plaster so it would absorb the paint. That's the best I can explain it to a child, like a sponge process, a chemical sponge process. These great artists who made frescoes, they could not go to like a Michael's Craft or an art store to get their paint. They made it. And they used pigments from the earth, they used ground up stone, ground up roots, ground up grass. Michelangelo did only 7 colors, and I guess mixed them all together and did his beautiful art pieces. But back to Fra Angelico. He loved the art of fresco art. So fresco means fresh. So they put fresh paint on plaster like a day before they start. And imagine like, well, I made one. I made a simulated fresco myself, where I used spackling paste, but it turned out beautifully and looks like plaster. So let's say that Fra Angelico would make his, his plaster with his lime and his volcanic ash and his chemical components, and then they would paint it on the wall that they were going to do, or the panel that they were going to get ready and prepare to paint on. So there is a process, and it's called giornata. I hope I'm saying it right. But what they would do, the artist would only put on enough plaster for what he thought he could paint that day, because the process of making a fresco was to paint on fresh, I guess wet plaster, because therefore it would have to dry, and they didn't want to like put the whole plaster on like I did. They didn't want to do that because they painted as it was wet. Let's say he would stop here and maybe the next day do a little more and let it dry with his paint already on it, and then the next day. So it might have taken days, months, or a year, I don't know, but they would only do fresh. So remember that. Giornata is the same day painting on the fresh, I guess you would call it plaster. They use a thin white paint, which is like, well, they say that they liked to get their cement mixture. They didn't call it cement though. They liked to get their plaster prepared, and then the next day they would paint a very thin white layer of their mixed paint, and I think the paint had lime in it to make white, and they would paint it over the plaster just so thin. The plaster feels like frosting, and I like that frosting look, the swirly look, but I would bet to guess that in those days when they made frescoes, in the Renaissance days, they probably tried really hard to make them flat like a painting. I made mine swirly like frosting because I just love that old world look. Well, anyway, so they would, then after they got their plaster and it was ready to start painting their fresco, they would get a cartoon-like picture over the white. So I would say, like this would be mine. This is the young child Christ. And you would put it there on the fresh, wet plaster. And then they would do a process called sporido, where they would pounce holes. Pounce, 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 pounce. They didn't put a piece of paper. They would draw on something and put it there. And then they would do the pouncing, the sporido. And they made holes, sort of like I don't know if any of you remember, we used to use carbon paper when we would type with a typewriter. They sort of would draw their drawing and then in a carbon way, but they would dot it, an outline of what their painting or portrait was going to be. And this would be like a tracing of an outline with a darker pigment, like a brown or a black or coaly looking kind of a texture. And they would do the Spordo with a pigment and some water. They would use green earth minerals and ochres and yellows and red. And they would be kind of clear and translucent when they first painted them until that chemical started absorbing, the chemical in when they first made their fresco pigment. And so it would be pastel looking and kind of faded, and then as it dried it would get rich and vibrant and just absolutely beautiful. So the air makes the lime in the wall harden, and therefore the pigment becomes cemented in place. So it's like if we paint our living room with something, you paint it maybe every 5 or 10 years, maybe 20 years. Theirs last 500, 1,000 years. Now in this video that I'm going to recommend to you, some of these frescoes last over 1,000 years old. They say that frescoes were made for the common ordinary man way back thousands and thousands of years ago to tell stories, to tell history. Some people would say, oh, I caught a buffalo, and someone else would say, oh, we cooked corn, or we played by the fire. It was just storytelling before they wrote letters. So I will give you that website. It's Michelangelo's fresco painting technique demonstrated from a Nova episode. So just put in fresco technique from a Nova episode, youtube.com. And they show you the process of fresco art, which is it's enchanting to me. And then there is I won't get into this because I could go on for hours, but there is a fresco YouTube channel called Artrageous with Nate, and the title is Michelangelo and the Science of Frescoes. It's a whole different subject. It's the science of frescoes. It gives you the chemical components and all the things that I don't quite understand, but after watching this you get a little more knowledge. They can find frescoes going back to 1500 years before Christ. The catacombs had frescoes made of limestone, I guess a rough version. There's volcanic ash, and there's chemical burns from the lime in the water, and it just explains everything. So I will quit with that, and we're going to make a fresco that does not have lime and that will not burn children's little hands, and that will turn out. I was very pleasantly surprised that in class the children made their own little frescoes. They did not paint, a picture of Jesus or a religious portrait. So what I did was I just found a picture of the Christ child, and I Xeroxed, probably 10 of them. And then we taught the children how to kind of decoupage it over the fresco which they made. So bear with me, and we will now do our little project. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to prepare a fresco for a child so they can understand the concept of making one. I got this wonderful recipe. It pretty much is a recipe for puff paint, but here we go. It requires a half a cup of shaving cream, so that was kind of fun. Kids love doing that. You just shake the shaving cream, measure a half a cup, like this. There's a half a cup of shaving cream. Put that inside a bowl, just like that. Okay, I'll put this away. And then it requires a half a cup of white glue. So a fourth a cup. Okay, so we've added a fourth a cup of shaving cream. Okay, and make sure you tell the children it's shaving cream because they kind of get carried away thinking it's whipped cream. So now it requires a fourth of a cup of white glue. So it's half cup shaving cream, fourth a cup white glue. So I'm going to just squeeze a fourth of a cup of white glue in there. You know what, this is going to take too long, so what I'll do is just take the lid off. There we go. And we just do this, fourth There we go. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, that's about enough. And we put that inside our mixture right in there. So we're mixing the glue with the shaving cream. There we go. And I'll place this over here. And the last thing we're going to put in is 1/8 of a cup of cornstarch. So here is the cornstarch. Be careful, it flies all over the place. I think I'm just going to do it like this. There we go. And that's it. So we're going to stir it up. I have these little tiny artist spatulas that come when you buy brushes. And here's my big spackling spatula. So we stir it up, stir it, stir it, stir it, stir it, and this actually forms a sort of a puffy paint that hardens. So there we go. And then what I had them do, I think I'm going to add a little more cornstarch to really make it thick. So there we go. It's a wonderful, non-toxic way of teaching children. So you stir and you stir and you stir. And they loved stirring. And we are making our own Fresco plaster without volcanic ash or lime or anything that would burn on their little hands. Okay, so once that was, it's starting to get a little bit stiff. It's almost kind of like a frosting. So then I bought these little wooden cutout shapes. And I had the children sort of frost it. And then you just frost it all over to the edge. And I like leaving curves and swirls just to get the concept of the idea of a fresco, plastering a wall. Okay, so there's one, and it will have to dry. It takes about a day. So I'll put this one over here, and we'll forget about it. And here's what it turned out like. Here is a dried one. It's all dry, and it still feels puffy like puff paint, but it's hard. And then what we did was we got one of the little cutouts that I had Xeroxed for the children, and we just glued with white glue. So I'll do that with you. You get some white glue and you just glue. Put some like this from my poured out glue. Just put a little bit of glue like that, and then get your little spatula and just kind of put the glue like that, and that's enough for Jesus. So what I'll do is leave it like that, and I'll get a paper towel. It's good to have baby wipes, which I need to get, or some wet paper towels. So now you're going to make the glue kind of smooth like that. You're going to place your picture of the child Christ right there like that. And then you kind of do this with your fingers because the glue will dry on your fresco. Now, that I'm not going to wait for it to dry, but let's pretend it has gotten dry. And then this is where we do our sporada. I'm going to try to pronounce that right. It is called sporido, pouncing holes of a pattern. So we would be tracing with a dark pigment of our pattern of where we wanted to paint. So we just punched one out with a hole punch and some puffy foam, and you put it over this like that, and then we are doing the dotting to make our pattern appear. So what I'll do is just use a little bit like this. I'll go like this and make an indentation. You can use a pen or a pencil. If you don't want it to show, just put a dot like that. See? So now maybe I should use a marker because you want to see it better. So I'll find a marker right here. Because we're teaching children, maybe we need to see it. I can see it with my eye, but there you go. Okay, so this is the art form of dotting what you want to paint on there. So in reality, they would have dotted Jesus's face, but I just taught them the concept. So there's our dots that they cartooned his figure in, and then they dotted. Okay, so now this is the fun part. You get a gold. You choose a pretty gold. So I will use, let's see, the bright gold. And we're going to kind of act like we're painting over our Xerox copy. So here is a little bit of gold, just a little bit. Okay? And then you get a thin brush, and you kind of paint over Jesus. So I did his curls, and the children did too. Just swirl some little gold, and that way it looks like it's your painting. You followed your little holes, you followed them, and now you know exactly, that's how they measured their cartoon. They called it cartooning. You'll see that on the video. There, I put a little hair on him, and I'm going to do a little bit of a little eyebrow, and maybe shadowing right there. And then I'm going to do his, I guess you call it his collar. Then I'll put a little gold here for his aura halo. Little gold here, little gold here. And then where we have the dots, he did not put jewels. He did all artwork. But we're going to put jewels to give it some glitz for the children to learn that you follow your dots. So I've chosen gold to keep it kind of royal and sedate. Let's see, I have them hidden right here. Here would be gold. We'll use a little bit of glue. So here would be glue, glue, glue. Little glue. You can use hot glue too, but it's very hot for children, for their little hands. Okay, so there you have that, and you just put your little jewels that you chose. So we will have right there, where you did your dotting so they can follow their dots. And right there. I actually had the children put their little fingers over the fresco. I asked them to feel it and touch it, and they could feel the bumps, and they could feel how it had ruffles and bubbles, and how the texture was. So here are my jewels, and I'm going to get a few more because we need one more. So there we go. Now, I don't believe they had jewels on them. Maybe some of the chalices did, but we're not doing that. Right? This is totally added by us to make it look fancy. Okay, so there you have it. Now, it still looks real white. Michelangelo loved his to be real pristine and white. I like it to look a little bit antiqued, so I have a darker gold, just a little bit darker gold, where I'm going to put it down here like this. Okay, see how that's darker? And then I'm going to get a light brush, and I'm going to go over it like this. And I'm going to make it look old. Go around him. Go around, go around, go around, go around. Kind of shadow it. You can see the wrinkles in the wall. I just love that look. Make it kind of look old. There we go. A little bit more of the dark gold. And then it doesn't look like you glued something on there either. Okay? Okay, so now that's done, and I'm going to put a little bit of red. Now, I use this red glitter. It does not dry very fast. That's the only bad thing about it. So I will use some red paint. Just a little bit. There we go. And then you can, I believe that's a cross around Jesus above him in the background. So I'm going to just kind of paint a little bit of red to outline it. Little accentuate it, I mean. There you go. Okay? And there you have it. It looks old. And then there's one more step. This is called Mod Podge. And I've done it in my other series. It's a lacquer, sort of a gloss luster glue mixture. I make my own a lot of times out of half glue and half water. And then this is going to give it kind of a glossy look, so it's kind of sealed in. Now normally I'd wait for it to dry, but we're not going to today. So there we go, and it'll dry kind of glossy and old looking. And it merges the Xerox picture of Jesus into your fresco. Okay, and then that's finished. And here we have the finished product right here. Okay, and here's the one you and I just made right now. And it kind of gives you the idea of how a fresco is made. Now, we're going to make a large one. So let me put these here. So I thought I would try to experiment and make a form of a fresco for my own self. So what I did was I got an old canvas of mine which was damaged. It had a hole in it. So I put a piece of tape, and I got some, they call it dry deck spackling paste. And what it is, it really reminded me of how Michelangelo did his, because he said when he first put his mixture on, it was sort of violet from the pigment. And the funny thing is, this is hot pink. And you get a spatula or a spackling tool, and I dipped it in this pink spackle, and I just went crazy like I was frosting the canvas. And then that evening, it was only about 4 hours, it dried. And this is how it dried. I'd like you to see. I did not do it nice and flat for a painting. I did it messy on purpose, swirly and messy like frosting. So now it turned white. And then I got white paint, and just like they did it, I thinned it out and painted over it. So now it's ready. Now this is just a canvas. I made it look like a frame. I painted gold around it. I did it crooked and messy to make it look old. And then I got some of my nail polish and just put some nail polish on it to give it a bit of sparkle. I don't know if you can see the sparkle. And I love how it looks. It looks like an old frame. Okay, so I'm ready to do my art. Now, I do draw, but we don't have time, so I enlarged the Christ child, and we'll pretend this is my painting. So I've sketched out with a pencil, or they did it with probably charcoal. So pretend I sketched this, okay? So now I'm going to make my, what they call a cartoon. So what they would do was, they would make it like they were going to do carbon and draw the outline onto their fresco. So here's my way of doing it. Okay, so I will put this down like that. Okay, and we're going to just trace. This is the cartoon. We're pretending that I'm painting it, but I'm really tracing it because we're not using my art. Okay, so I'm painting the Christ child. And there we go. And there we have it. So I'll put that back. And this is going to be the one that I cut out. So I'll cut it so we can do our sporido. And there we go. It doesn't have to be perfect because I'm just using it to transfer my cartoon onto my fresco, which is what they did. Except, bless their hearts, they drew it on. There we go. And this is just a piece of like puff foam. I could use paper, but this works better for me. So I'm going to put that there. And I'll make sure, let's see, which side was it? There we go. Okay, so where do I want him? I think I don't like him in the middle. I'll put it a little off the middle. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to get a small brush, and I'm going to do my pounding. Okay, so I'll get the dark gold, and I'll start outlining where I'm going to put my Christ child. I think I like it there, so I'm going to go just like they did, pound, and not too dark. They used like, I think, coal or charcoal, and I'm just going to do this, and that's going to tell me where it's going to go, so I have something to almost copy. It's almost like tracing their own work. Okay, they just were so magnificent, so genius. What I've done is I made myself a pattern with a hole to do my sporido. So I'll put it in the corner, and I'll put the dot there, and that's where my jewel's going to be. Put it in the next corner, dot it. It's kind of a wonderful process of copying. Remember, no Xerox machines, no carbon paper, geniuses. Okay, so there we go. So pretty much they're in the same sporido. Your little sporido dots are in the same place. Now this would have been painted by Angelico, but we're going to use a jewel, pretend he used shiny paint. Now I'm going to choose, I already chose 4 gold ones. I want it to be kind of authentic and not too gaudy. So I'm going to get a glue gun because it's me, it's not a child. So bear with me, I'll glue the jewels in each corner. So now we have glued the Christ child onto the fresco. We dappled, we did sporido all around. We put the jewels on. And then I got some gold paint, the same gold paint that you did his curls with, and kind of put it around, like right there, anywhere that kind of makes it look like it's merged in. And then I'm going to get my sparkly nail polish and my gold nail polish, and I'm going to just outline. I'll show you. We'll just kind of outline it. I'm trying to make it feel like it's embedded in the fresco. So I'll outline a little bit like that, and not everywhere. You don't want it perfect, just around to make it look old. So there's some there, and then I'll do some there. And see how it doesn't have a perfect line about the halo? And some there. Some there. I believe that's a cross behind Jesus. So I'm going to get some sparkly red nail polish and just kind of outline the cross or fill it in. Just a little bit, not perfectly, just like that. Okay, and then I'll do the other side. And one more step and we are finished. The next step is to get some Mod Podge and go over the whole thing. Now, because my nail polish is drying, I'm just going to go over part of it, just so you can get the idea. Okay, so you would do this. Okay, and you blend it in with the Fresco. And it gives it, like it's not even glued on top. It'll give it a sheen, but a natural sheen, like the lights hitting it from the church, or the chapel, or the cathedral. Here you have your finished fresco. And I love feeling the frosting like plaster. There is the one that we made in class, and here is the one we made together today. It's almost dry. Okay, thanks for watching. Now tune in next week because we're going to do a special Valentine project. We are not going to go with the Renaissance artists. We're taking the week off to do something fun and special. The history is fun, but this is going to be crafty fun. Thank you and have a great week.